Somewhere right now on a laptop that should have died 2 years ago, Windows 11 is running faster than it has any right to. No lag, no stutter, no mysterious background process eating 40% of the CPU for reasons nobody can explain. And the people experiencing this aren't running expensive new hardware. They're running the exact same machine that felt sluggish, bloated, and frustrating just weeks earlier. Something changed. Something Microsoft didn't build, didn't approve, and didn't even want to exist. And the question nobody in the tech industry wants to answer directly is this: if a small group of independent developers can fix what Microsoft has failed to fix for over a decade, what does that say about the company sitting on $1 trillion valuation? This is the story of Atlasos. Not a new operating system in the way most people assume, not a Linux distribution, not a piracy tool. Something stranger, something more uncomfortable for Microsoft, because it exposes a truth the company has spent years trying to bury under marketing language about modern experiences and integrated ecosystems. Here's where it starts to get interesting. Windows 11, on a technical level, is not actually a slow operating system. The silicon underneath modern laptops and desktops is more capable than anything consumers had access to a decade ago. And yet user complaints about sluggishness, stutter, background noise, and unexplained resource drain have only intensified since Windows 11 launched. That's not supposed to happen. Hardware gets faster, software is supposed to feel faster. Instead, millions of users report the opposite experience. Read that again. The hardware improved, the experience got worse. That contradiction is the seed of everything that follows. What most people are not seeing is that this isn't really a performance problem. It's a design philosophy problem. Microsoft did not accidentally let Windows become heavier, noisier, and more demanding. Every addition, every background service, every telemetry pipeline, every forced integration with Bing, with Copilot, with advertising-driven start menu suggestions was a deliberate choice. Windows 11 isn't bloated by accident. It's bloated by business model. And once you understand that, you start to understand why an outside project like Atlasos could do something Microsoft, with its army of engineers and billions in resources, apparently couldn't or wouldn't. But here's where it gets worse. This isn't just about removing a few unwanted apps. The modern version of Windows ships with scheduled tasks, background telemetry collectors, search indexing tied to cloud services, animation rendering pipelines, advertising hooks baked into the start menu, and integration layers connecting the operating system to Microsoft's account ecosystem, its store, its Xbox services, and its AI assistant. None of this is hidden exactly, but none of it is optional in any meaningful sense either. You can disable pieces of it through registry edits and obscure settings menus, but the moment you do, Windows quietly resets them on the next update. The system is built to resist being simplified. That's not an exaggeration. That's the architecture. Think about what that means for a second. An operating system that actively works against users who want a lighter, faster, quieter experience. Not through malice exactly, but through a structural incentive to keep you connected, keep you logged in, keep you inside Microsoft's ecosystem of subscriptions, cloud storage, and advertising surfaces. Every background process that phones home, every suggestion in your start menu, every nudge toward a Microsoft account instead of a local one, exists because disconnected, lightweight, private computing doesn't generate revenue the way an integrated data-flowing ecosystem does. This is where Atlasos enters the story and where the real tension begins. Atlasos started as a project built by enthusiasts who were frustrated by something very specific: competitive gaming performance. Milliseconds matter in esports. A single background process triggering at the wrong moment can mean a missed shot, a lost match, a broken moment of concentration that took years to build. The earliest builds of Atlas were designed for exactly this audience, gamers who needed every shred of CPU and memory headroom they could get, and who had grown tired of an operating system that seemed engineered to work against them rather than for them. What happened next is the part most people miss. Atlas didn't stay a niche gaming tool. It evolved. The community around it grew past 50,000 members, with the broader user base reaching into the millions. And the more people used it, the more obvious a pattern became. This wasn't just helping gamers. It was solving a problem Microsoft itself had created and refused to solve. For everyone. Here's the part that should make you sit up. Atlasos does not crack Windows. It does not pirate it. It does not break Microsoft's licensing terms. It takes a fully legitimate, fully paid, fully activated Windows 11 installation and strips away the layers Microsoft added on top. The bloatware, the telemetry, the forced animations, the bundled apps nobody asked for, the background noise competing for resources. What's left underneath is the operating system Microsoft could have shipped from the beginning, lean, quiet, fast, and still receiving every security patch, every critical update, the same as any standard Windows machine. This is not chaos, this is precision. And this is where everything changes, because once you see what's actually being removed, you start to realize how much of default Windows was never necessary in the first place. According to the project's own technical breakdowns, debloated installations have shown internally tested results of idle CPU usage dropping to near zero, RAM consumption falling by as much as half, and frame rates in competitive titles improving by significant margins, in some documented cases more than 50%. One widely cited internal test on a Zephyrus gaming laptop showed up to 3 additional hours of battery life, simply from disabling the layers of background processing that standard Windows leaves running by default. 3 hours, not from new hardware, not from a chip upgrade, from subtraction, from removing what should never have been forced onto the user in the first place. But raw numbers only tell part of the story. The real shift is psychological, and this is the part creators and reviewers keep circling back to in their breakdowns. People aren't just experiencing a faster machine. They're experiencing a calmer one. No notification pop-ups nudging them toward a Microsoft account they never wanted. No Bing search results bleeding into what should be a simple local file search. No mysterious processes spinning up in Task Manager with names nobody recognizes. The Start menu stops being a billboard and goes back to being a launcher. For an entire generation of users who grew up associating their computer with a sense of ownership and control, this feels less like a software tweak and more like getting something back that had quietly been taken from them. So why hasn't Microsoft just done this themselves? That's the uncomfortable question sitting underneath this entire story. And the real story is more layered than simple incompetence. Microsoft is not a software company in the way it was 20 years ago. It is a services and subscription company that happens to still ship an operating system. The financial engine driving the modern Microsoft is Azure, cloud infrastructure, enterprise subscriptions, and increasingly AI integration through Copilot. Windows itself, the consumer desktop operating system millions of people interact with every day, has become less of a profit center on its own and more of a delivery surface, a doorway designed to funnel users toward Microsoft accounts, OneDrive subscriptions, Microsoft 365, Xbox Game Pass, and now, aggressively, Copilot AI features baked directly into the shell of the operating system. Every one of those integrations requires background processes. Every one of those processes requires resources. Every resource taken is resource not given back to the user. This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. What was expected from a trillion-dollar company with some of the most talented engineers on the planet was an operating system that respected the hardware running it and the people paying for it. What actually happened was an operating system increasingly shaped by advertising incentives, AI integration mandates, and ecosystem lock-in strategies that prioritize Microsoft's long-term subscription revenue over the immediate experience of the person sitting at the keyboard. Atlasos didn't invent a new philosophy of computing. It simply built the version of Windows that put the user first instead of the business model first. And the fact that a volunteer-driven open-source community could do that, while Microsoft's own product team apparently could not or chose not to, is the real indictment hiding inside this entire story. Now here's where the stakes climb again, because this isn't just a story about software anymore. It's a story about who actually controls the operating system running on more than 1 billion devices worldwide. Microsoft has, in recent years, taken increasingly aggressive steps to push users toward mandatory Microsoft account sign-ins during the Windows setup process, closing off the local account workaround that long let privacy-conscious users avoid linking their machine to the cloud. Tech forums have documented this shift extensively, framing it as a turning point in how locked down consumer computing has become. The pushback wasn't quiet. It was loud, frustrated, and widespread, and it is precisely the kind of resentment that gave projects like Atlasos room to grow from a niche gaming tweak into something resembling a genuine movement. Think about what that signals. A company with total control over the dominant desktop operating system on the planet, deciding, deliberately, to make it harder for users to opt out of its data ecosystem. Not because the technology requires it. Bypassing the requirement is trivial, documented openly across forums and guides, accomplished with a few keystrokes during setup. The friction exists for one reason only: to nudge as many users as possible into staying connected, staying tracked, staying inside the loop that feeds Microsoft's account-driven services. Atlasos and the community of guides and tools that have grown around it exist specifically to dismantle that friction. And here's where the picture widens even further, because Atlasos is not operating in isolation. It exists alongside an entire underground ecosystem of debloating tools, scripts, and modified installations, some more reckless than others. Some projects achieve a lighter Windows experience by stripping out security components entirely, leaving users with a faster but dangerously exposed system. Atlasos has positioned itself deliberately against that approach. The project maintains a clear philosophy: Users keep receiving cumulative security updates and critical patches, the same baseline protection as a standard Windows installation, while feature updates that risk breaking the optimizations are deliberately skipped. Security is not sacrificed for speed. It's a calculated trade-off, openly documented, leaving the riskier decisions in the hands of the user rather than forcing a one-size-fits-all compromise. This matters more than it sounds like at first. It separates Atlas OS from the disposable, tiny Windows variants that strip security to chase benchmark numbers, the kind of modified builds that look impressive in a YouTube comparison video but leave users vulnerable the moment they touch the internet. Atlas OS chose a harder path, balancing performance gains against genuine ongoing security, and that choice is precisely why it has survived and grown for years, while flashier alternatives have come and gone. But here's where it gets worse for Microsoft specifically, and this is the part that should genuinely concern anyone watching the broader trajectory of the company. Atlas OS is fully open source. Every modification, every registry change, every removed component is documented publicly and auditable by anyone with the technical skill to look. There is no hidden agenda, no secret data collection layer, no mystery about what's happening under the hood. Compare that, for a moment, to the operating system it's modifying. Windows 11's telemetry systems, the data Microsoft collects, the purposes it's used for, the third parties it may eventually touch, none of that carries the same level of transparency. One side of this story is built on radical openness. The other side is built on a closed, opaque system increasingly justified through vague language about improving user experience and personalization. And this is exactly the kind of contrast that fuels viral momentum. It's not just that Atlas OS makes your computer faster, it's that it makes you feel like you finally understand what your computer is actually doing. For years, an entire generation of users sensed something was off about their machines without being able to articulate exactly what. Atlas OS gave that feeling a name and a fix. Now think bigger. Think about what it means that millions of people are choosing to actively modify their operating system, taking on real risk, real technical complexity, real potential for things to break, all to escape decisions made by the company that built the software in the first place. That is not a small grievance. That is a structural trust failure between a software giant and the public that depends on its product every single day. When users start treating the default version of an operating system as something to be stripped down and corrected before it's usable, the company behind that operating system has a branding problem too large to fix with another marketing campaign. This is where the power shift becomes undeniable. For decades, the relationship between Microsoft and its users was simple. Microsoft built the operating system. Users adapted to it. There was no real alternative for the average consumer who didn't want to learn Linux from scratch. That power imbalance is exactly what made decisions like forced telemetry, mandatory account sign-ins, and ever-expanding bloatware politically survivable inside Microsoft's product roadmap. Users complained, but they stayed, because where else would they go? Atlas OS quietly broke that equation. It didn't ask users to abandon Windows. It didn't demand they learn a new operating system from the ground up, switch every piece of software they relied on, or sacrifice compatibility with the games, drivers, and tools they already depended on. It offered something far more dangerous to Microsoft's leverage: the same operating system, the same compatibility, the same licensing legitimacy, but without the parts Microsoft added specifically to serve its own business interests rather than the users. That is the precise moment the power dynamic flips. Microsoft no longer holds unchallenged control over what Windows feels like to the people using it. A volunteer community does, and the consequences of that shift are already visible, even if Microsoft hasn't publicly acknowledged the pressure directly. The broader conversation around Windows 11 has shifted noticeably over the past year, with growing public scrutiny over mandatory account requirements, AI features users never asked for being integrated directly into the taskbar and start menu, and a steady stream of complaints about background resource usage on machines that should be more than capable of running smoothly. Tech outlets have started openly recommending Atlas OS as the antidote, not as a fringe hack for power users, but as a mainstream solution for anyone fed up with the standard experience. That's a significant escalation. What used to be confined to gaming forums and tech enthusiast communities is now showing up in mainstream coverage, framed not as a workaround, but as the version of Windows that should have existed all along. Here's a detail that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Atlas OS doesn't just remove things. It replaces certain defaults with alternatives chosen specifically because they respect user privacy and performance. Swapping Microsoft Edge for Brave as the default browser, for instance, a deliberate statement about which priorities the project actually values. It disables Bing integrated search inside the start menu, turning what had become a sluggish, ad-influenced web search box back into a fast, local, keyboard-driven application launcher. Responsive enough that many users report no longer needing third-party launcher tools at all. Small details, But small details that, stacked together, paint an unmistakable picture of intent. This is not random stripping for the sake of minimalism. This is a deliberate philosophical statement about what an operating system owes the person using it. Now here's where the uncertainty creeps in, because nothing about this story is settled, and that's exactly what makes it worth watching closely. Atlasos, as of its most recent major release, has expanded support to the newest Windows 11 feature update, bringing improved stability, broader compatibility, and a refined toolbox interface for managing the debloating process. Tens of thousands of new users have adopted it in just the past several months, according to community trackers, and the project's open source repositories continue to show active, near-daily development. This is not a dying hobbyist project running on fumes, it's accelerating. But acceleration brings exposure, and exposure brings risk. As more mainstream users, not just gamers and tech enthusiasts, but everyday people frustrated with their laptops, start adopting these kinds of modifications, the margin for error narrows. A registry tweak that a power user understands perfectly can become a serious problem in the hands of someone who doesn't fully grasp what they're disabling. The Atlasos team has been explicit and consistent about this risk, urging full backups, careful documentation review, and clear-eyed understanding before anyone applies the modifications to a system they depend on. That caution is appropriate, even admirable, but it also signals something larger. The further this kind of modification spreads into the mainstream, the more pressure builds on Microsoft to either respond by actually fixing the underlying bloat and trust problems at the source, or to push back by tightening licensing terms, update mechanisms, or compatibility checks in ways that make third-party debloating tools harder to maintain. And that's the question nobody can answer yet. Will Microsoft quietly absorb the lesson Atlasos is teaching millions of users in real time, that a lighter, faster, more respectful operating system is not only possible but already exists, built by people with a fraction of Microsoft's resources? Or will the company instead view tools like Atlasos as a threat to its ecosystem strategy and respond not with better engineering, but with tighter restrictions designed to make this kind of modification harder to sustain going forward? There is no clean answer sitting in front of us right now. What we do know is this: a community-built project has, in a very real and measurable sense, out-engineered one of the most powerful technology companies in the world, not by inventing new technology, but by simply refusing to compromise the user experience for the sake of a business model. Millions of people have voted with their installations, choosing a stripped-down, transparent, community-audited version of Windows over the official one shipped by the company that built it. What happens next depends on choices that haven't been made yet, inside boardrooms most of us will never see. Does Microsoft adapt, finally listening to a decade of accumulated frustration, and rebuild Windows around the principle that speed, privacy, and respect for the user shouldn't be something you have to download from a third party to get? Or does the gap between official Windows and community Windows continue to widen until using the unmodified default version of the world's most popular operating system starts to feel to an entire generation of users like settling for less than what's actually possible? One thing is certain: the people running Atlasos on their machines right now are not waiting around to find out. They've already made their decision. The only open question left is whether Microsoft is paying attention, and whether, when the answer finally comes, it will be too late to matter.